Our first session focuses on documentation, a critical aspect of combating enforced disappearance. Our speakers will shed light on multi-source data integration, best practices of database establishment, and findings from collecting information on North Korea's enforced disappearance. Now let's delve into the discussions with our esteemed speakers. Our first round of speakers will be discussing the best CSO practices in database establishment and advocacy on enforced disappearance. Please welcome Benedict Bono Salazar Olgado, Documentalist, and Hyebin Bina Jeon, Program Officer at Huridocs, the Human Rights Information and Documentation Systems.
Okay, I think we're good. Good morning. Let me first thank TJWG and Yonsei University for inviting us to be part of this conference workshop. I also extend my gratitude and admiration to all of you for your relentless pursuit of justice for the disappeared. We, together with Huridocs partners across the globe, stand in solidarity with all of you. Although cases and contexts of enforced disappearances vary from country to country, community to community, and case to case, we firmly believe that cooperation across boundaries and borders is essential to combat this shared phenomenon. This conference workshop is a testament to such commitments, and we are honored to be with you today. We at Huridocs, or the Human Rights Information and Documentation Systems, for 4 decades have been supporting human rights defenders across the globe with their documentation, information, and technological needs. At Huridocs, we actively support collectives, networks, and civil society organizations worldwide in their fight for justice in its various forms. We have achieved this primarily through co-developing documentation tools and strategies with our partners. Specifically, we set up and configure databases to help organize, make sense of, and provide access to the rich documentation our partners and their partners have meticulously collected. Through the databasing process, or the process of establishing these databases, actors can review, refine, and sometimes even pivot their documentation strategies and overall advocacy work. The case studies we highlight in our presentation today illustrate this process. When it comes specifically to enforced disappearances, we at Huridocs continue to work with families and civil society organizations. In Latin America, we're searching for in Latin America, we work with organizations who search for desaparecidos who are victims of organized crime, state violence, human trafficking, and migrant smuggling. In Eastern Europe, we collaborate with partners searching for the disappeared in the context of war and conflict. Here in Asia, we work with networks and diasporic movements documenting cases of enforced disappearances under authoritarian regimes, military takeovers, and social unrest. While we could spend hours discussing the incredible work of our partners, we will focus this presentation on highlighting some of the best practices and learnings from co-developing databases with them. The idea being, as Honorable Judge mentioned earlier, is that we can all learn from each other's practices and experiences. So to start us off, I'll hand it over to Bina to discuss our databasing tool, Owazi, which provides a technical context to these initiatives.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Bono, for the introduction, and thank you, TJWG, for having us today. It's extremely rewarding to finally watching our years of collaboration being put in place and being introduced. I would also like to take this chance and express my appreciations and respects to our fellow human rights defenders in the room. I've been following a lot of your work afar, and it's a great honor to be in this room together. I'm Bina. I am Program Officer of Huridocs. Huridocs stands for Human Rights Information and Documentation Systems, and it was founded more than 40 years ago by a group of human rights activists to explore ways of using information and documentation technologies for human rights work. And since then, we've been developing diverse tools and strategies to help and support human rights defenders across the globe. And today we would like to introduce, among a lot of tools that we have been developing, but we are going to focus on UASI, our flagship tool. So back in 2015, we supported 2 human rights organizations. And our main goal to support human rights organizations, the 2 organizations, was to set up online legal libraries for them to better manage and access case laws in Inter-America and Africa. And since then, we decided to launch this database application, which has evolved into a comprehensive database applications for human rights organizations to better manage their diverse type of information collection. So UASI is essentially a web-based open source database application tool, which is specifically built for human rights defenders' information management. And UASI, the word, means openness in Swahili language, which represents the value that we are promoting with this tool. And currently, we have more than 300 databases for around 150 human rights organizations across the globe. And we have a dedicated development team who is constantly maintaining this tool and also developing innovative features, including machine learning features. So for today's conference, we would like to introduce 4 different databases which focused on enforced disappearances. And both of them, all of them have unique challenges and approaches that we would like to share. And I believe it'll be relevant to your work as well. The first database that we would like to introduce is Disappeared Asia, and we designed and developed this database for an organization named Asian Federation Against Involuntary Disappearances. And it was a collective database for a federation organization, consists of 7 different organizations across Asia. And all of their work included enforced disappearances. And one of our challenges, main challenges that we faced was actually trust-building process before starting this project. Even within the same network, sometimes organizations are reluctant to share their years of entire collection to other networks. And another challenge that we had was to find a common data structure that works for every member organizations, because their own data collections are so unique to their contextual information. So it was hard for us to agree on a common data structure. And even then, when we found the common data structure, readjusting and migrating their 7 different data collections into a new system was also very challenging. So the main questions that we keep remind ourselves when we are having these challenges was, so what is the most important priority of this project? And our answer was, let's just focus on making a simple and functional database. And we decided to have a UN Working Group submission form as a structural reference point for everyone. And another approach that we took was we narrowed down our scope of work to EID victim records. And because there were some security concerns, we decided to redact sensitive information and only include non-sensitive information in this collective database. And we also implemented an in-application submission form within the database so that member organizations can quickly jump into the database and enter their data and to have the most up-to-date and dynamic database. So in the next slide, this is currently a private database, so we cannot share the database publicly. But this just represents how diverse and wide the network is. And now we currently have more than 3,000 victim records in the database, and it's keep growing. And this is the very first collective database that they have in this scale at the moment. So now I will hand it back to Bono to introduce another use case.
So while AFAD's, the Disappeared Asia database, as Bina mentioned, is based on the UN WGEID reporting form, it was designed to focus primarily on case management for legal accountability mechanisms, and which can also be used for name and shame advocacy strategies, particularly against state actors, which is primarily how WGID operates. There are, of course, a broader set of transitional justice mechanisms that utilize approaches beyond the law, governance, and diplomacy. And we're actually getting a lot of requests now on building databases beyond legal accountability mechanisms. And a good example of this is a project that we have done with the Afghanistan Human Rights and Democracy Organization, or ARDO. They are a prime example of a CSO dedicated to promoting participatory democracy, nonviolence, and social justice through community-based interventions, primarily employing artistic and victim-centered approaches. So over the years, ARDO has undertaken transitional justice projects that shape and activate collective memory to counteract the entrenched culture of impunity and pervasive violence in Afghanistan. These initiatives range from legislative theater projects focused on women's rights to providing Afghan artists with platforms to exhibit their human rights-related work. So ARDO uses innovative art-based methods to discuss conflict and transitional justice issues at the grassroots level. They continue to explore such methodologies in their work around enforced disappearances as well. The Memory Box Initiative is an example of this. So what you see on screen is an example of a memory box. This is specifically of and for Naroz Ali Hassanzada. So this initiative aims to make the victims of the Afghanistan multiple-decade war, including the disappeared, as the main protagonists of the creation of public memory. Victims are seen not as subjects in the victor's narrative, but rather as a protagonists who resist, struggle, mourn, and hope. Memory boxes are often produced by survivors or the loved ones of the victims during workshops facilitated by ARDO. The goal is to create a memorial that captures the real cost of the war, their words, representing the fullness of lives lost and taken rather than merely listing names or counting bodies, which of course is also a valid strategy, but what ARDO is saying is that there are numerous mechanisms of pursuit of justice. So participants have a complete autonomy in creating their memory boxes, which can include, as you can see on the screen, personal mementos, documents, trinkets, or any items associated with their loved ones. They also produce works such as poems, drawings, and paintings that reflect their current life situations and aspirations. We have a lot of time. Okay, so we'll show a very short clip of this particular initiative. So the challenge for this particular initiative is that even us at Huridocs when we took in this project, was not necessarily equipped to do and pursue databases for memorialization initiatives. So we had to throw most of our data models out the window and try to really figure out what kind of schema and structure works for this particular organization. One of the big challenges was how do we actually transfer or even recreate the emotional impact of these physical objects and the museum into an online platform. So to achieve this, ARDO and Huridocs sought the expertise of museum professionals, artists, designers, and memory scholars, folks who usually are not part of the databasing project. The process also centered the voices of victims and their families. The data modeling discussions were unique as we incorporated these new perspectives. There were, of course, tensions and disagreements, resistance to both old and new ideas, and seemingly irreconcilable disciplinarily differences. However, it ultimately became a collaborative effort driven by Ardo's commitment to developing a victim-centered database. It's not perfect, but as the victims and their families have expressed, nothing will ever be.
Okay, so back to me. Another use case that we would like to introduce, which is focused on enforced disappearance in Turkey. It literally means enforced disappearance database. And this database was for one of our partners, Hafiza Merkezi, and this database was for us to document, track, and extract patterns of enforced disappearances in Turkey since the military coup in the 80s. And the main challenges that we have for this project was that they had to remodel and migrate their historical data collection from one platform, which was terminated, to another platform, which was UASI. And another main challenge that we also had was they closed down their database for increased security concerns in the region, and they were reluctant to share the information, but at the same time, they wanted to keep up their legacy work and bring the public awareness of the situation as well. So we were torn between this dilemma. So they wanted to have this database up and running again, but at the same time, they were really concerned with the sensitive information that they had. So the main questions that they brought to us, which was a tricky one, and is there a workflow for us to avoid working in two different data collections, one for public-facing one and one for private collection, and I don't want to work back and forth between my data collections. So in order for us to achieve this goal was we had this technical solutions called synchronizations. So we offered a synchronized databases. And essentially how it works is you don't have to work in two different databases. You only solely work on one private database, which includes and archive every information that you collect, including sensitive information. But you choose a specific subset of data that you would like to share with the public. So the whitelisted subset of data will be automatically reflected in the public-facing synced instance in another database. So while having one platform to work on, you can also have this private database for your own work and a public-facing one as a public advocacy work. So that was another unique use case that we had, specifically focusing on enforced disappearances. And this database will be launched in July, but we had our partners' permission to only share the screenshots of it. So we now have this database, which has the initial data collections that they are going to open, which is 500 victim records, and they are going to display the geographical distributions of their cases that they recorded with the victim files, excluding the sensitive information.
Our fourth case study, of course, highlights why we're here today, which is TJWG's footprints. We'll leave the in-depth discussion of the initiative with our dear colleagues at TJWG, but for this presentation, we would like to highlight the importance of and the work behind improving databases and making them more accessible. So database development is an ongoing process of constant iteration. This is one of our main philosophies at Huridocs. And the Footprints database is a testament to this. So even after the initial public launch of Footprints 1.0 in 2021, TJWG knew that it needed to improve the database, particularly around user accessibility. So we worked with TJWG in identifying existing constraints and pain points. The original data schema, for example, proved to be unwieldy as more data continued to come in. So this slowed down access to and the management of the first version of the database, both by the administrators, the documenters, and even by the end users. So it limited data visualization options and the overall public-facing instance that was then available. It was clear that the original data model need to be reviewed and eventually be redesigned, with a particular focus on end-user needs and data integrity. And so the organization committed time and effort to do an extensive discovery, user study, and data rationalization, all directed towards streamlining the data model without the goal being losing its meaningful depth and coverage. The other challenge was around translation. So to be able to reach a broader audience, TJWG identified the need to translate their data to English. This proved to be difficult and time-consuming with almost 100,000 entries with multiple fields of varying possible values. At this point, the organization was meticulously doing manual translation, which offers the benefit of paying close attention to nuance and context, ensuring a more accurate and culturally relevant translation. However, it can be time-consuming and carries risks of inconsistencies and human error. But with several entries manually translated, they were able to come up with a version of a translation codebook. And then the task for Huridocs is to figure out, okay, so how do we use this codebook to actually automate the translation? So Bina and I reviewed a number of possible options, and we actually just ended up with an Excel sheet as opposed to very expensive options. So this is an example of how we did it. So this is a good example of iteration and human integration and a simple technological tool. And so I think we've cut down the translation cut it down by years, I would say, because it took them like several months to finish like 100 translations. I'm going to extend by a few minutes just to wrap this up. So with each new project and partner, we do learn and carry what we carry forward the lessons that we learn from each of these projects. This is what we call solidarity-based development. What we learn from our partners in Sri Lanka informs our work in Burma. The tools we develop for TJWG becomes the foundation for solutions we offer in Sudan. Through solidarity-based development, we iterate together as a global movement, learning from specific experiences and contexts of local actors worldwide. In the spirit, we leave you the following broad key takeaways from our solidarity-driven work of establishing databases for advocacy on enforced disappearances. So know what you have. Assess your existing documentation, resources, processes, and expertise. These will inform what you can and cannot do at the onset. Know what you want to do holistically. Transitional justice encompasses various mechanisms and strategies. Think through your larger goals and see how your database fits into and serves those goals. Do not let your database drive your objectives. Know what you need. Focus on the primary things you truly require to attain your goals. Start small with what is necessary and add along as needed while remaining flexible and open to changes. Know that databasing is an ongoing iterative process. Iteration allows us to make mistakes and learn from them, enabling continuous improvement. Look at and learn from other communities. Study their successes and drawbacks. However, avoid copy-pasting templates without reviewing how they align with your own goals. So I'll conclude by commending, again, all of you for your work that you have done and that you continue to do. Borrowing from Frank Haldeman, our task is both impossible and necessary, painfully incomplete and always inadequate. Yet we march on in whatever limited and fallible way that we can. The databases we create reflect this incommensurability. In the face of this incommensurability is not failure, because here we see that databases themselves become sites of struggle and solidarity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bono and Hyebin. Our second round of speakers are Transitional Justice Working Group's very own Footprints team. They will be sharing their findings from collecting information on North Korea's enforced disappearance and the launch of the open database Footprints 2.0. Please welcome Jonghyun Kang, Project Manager, and April Songa Park, Documentation Officer.
Good morning. Okay, first of all, thank you, Hyebin and Bono, for the wonderful presentation and giving a great introduction of the Footprints database. So this is the Footprints 2.0 that was launched just this morning, and we are very happy to be able to show and discuss this database with all of you today. Before we dive in, just a short introduction. I'm April Park.
I'm Jonghyun Kang.
and we are researchers at TJWG on topic of enforced disappearance. And today we're going to mainly discuss how the Footprints project started, our documentation process, and how to navigate the database. As many of you already know and mentioned earlier in the video, in 2014, UN COI report was released, and the report stated that well over 200,000 persons who were taken from other countries to North Korea are potential victims of enforced disappearance. And since the 1950s, North Korea has continuously perpetrated the crime of enforced disappearance, and the victims can be categorized into these three big groups. And our database also based our categorization on these categories, and we'll give a little bit more information on that later in the presentation.
As we saw in the previous slide, North Korea has a long history and large scale of practicing enforced disappearance, but the information of victims was scattered, making it challenging to obtain a comprehensive picture of the scale and specifics of enforced disappearance perpetrated by North Korea. So to address this issue, we started the Footprints project in partnership with other civil society organizations. These organizations, along with victim families, has collected and preserved information on victims for a long time, providing a solid foundation for our project. We want to take this moment to thank all our partner organizations for their decade-long efforts to preserve and collect all the crucial information. So, our project is divided into two phases. First phase, the goal was to document and build a database that consolidates information not only on victims, but also on communications that victims' families submitted to UN working groups, court decisions, and related perpetrators. During phase one, we collected victim records amounting to 90,000 victim records, mostly South Korean victims, in various formats, and we began to, in the process of organizing it and document it in a standardized format. So we started to build database with Huridocs, having our first launch in 2021 with around 20,000 victims, 300 proceedings, and 15 perpetrators. However, during phase one, we found little information on enforced disappearances of North Koreans, although it is well known that many Korean people are taken by authorities and go missing. So recognizing the needs for further investigation and documentation of these cases, the enforced disappearances of North Koreans, we initiated phase two to address this issue. So in phase two, we conducted in-depth interviews with North Korean escapees, primarily families, members, or acquaintances of those who were taken by North Korean authorities and whose fate or whereabouts remain unknown. Through these interview records, we have been analyzing the characteristics and patterns of enforced disappearances, and we also have been documenting the cases obtained through interviews in our online database and offline database. So our database includes information on 107 North Korean people, victims of enforced disappearances. So later we'll explain a couple of cases and how these cases are formatted in our database. Yeah. This is the Footprints 1.0. This is 2.0. 2.0 houses up to 96,000 victims, including the information from our interviews and as well as information provided by our partner organizations that was not available to the public in 2021. In Footprints 2.1,
Descriptions for each type of victims have been added to the individual pages.
So we actually wanted to go through the database and provide you some explanations. So this is the landing page, and users can use this search bar to look up specific victims, proceedings, or perpetrators by typing in keywords. And we have a breakdown of the victims documented in our database. We also divided into 3 time periods and tried to visually show the number of victims taken in each time period. And of course, the number of undocumented cases is far greater than, for example, the 56 documented case under the Kim Jong-un era. But this just shows the need to continue the investigation on crimes of enforced disappearance and update the database along the way. We also have a couple of testimonies from our in-depth interviews. And if you click on this little button called Read More, you can go on the individual victim card to get more information. This is a map that locates where victims have been taken. And as you can see, people have been taken outside North and South Korea, which shows the international nature of North Korea's enforced disappearance. Here you can see the latest proceedings TJWG and partner organizations have submitted to UN working groups. And of course, if victim families want to reach out to us regarding other cases of enforced disappearance, they can contact us and send a direct message using this database. And as Jeon mentioned, we have added specific pages that give a little bit more explanation about each victim type. And you can see them right under here. And we want to go under.
So due to limited time available for presentation, I will provide a very brief explanation on its victim type. So here the South Korean victims base includes South Korean prisoners of war, Korean war abductees, and Korean post-war abductees. First, looking at the prisoners of war section, it is noted that at least around 50,000 South Korean soldiers were taken by North Korea, but North Korea has refused to repatriate them. To date, only about 80 of them have returned. Currently, Footprints documents only 1 prisoners of war. Moving to the Korean war abductees, during the Korean War, it is reported that North Korean abducted about 90,000 to 100,000 South Koreans. Footprints documents about 96,000 Korean war abductees. Next, let's look at the post-war abductees. Even after Korean War ended, North Korea is known to have abducted 3,835 South Koreans, of whom 3,319 were returned to South Korea. So this leaves 516 South Koreans still missing in North Korea. Additionally, in the 2010s, 7 more South Korean nationals were abducted by North Korea. And North Korea does not allow any contact with outside the world, and their families have no ways of knowing where their loved one is and how their loved one is living. Footprints 2.0 documents all these cases.
And moving on to victims of other nationalities. Like South Korean victims, we have divided this category into 3. So the first one, so returnees from Japan. So in the early 1960s, ethnic Koreans and their Japanese families have, quote unquote, returned to North Korea under the Paradise on Earth campaign, and they were not able to return. Japanese nationals were also abducted to either facilitate terrorist activities or to be given into marriage. And last but not least, nationals of countries from Europe and Asia, such as Thailand, Lebanon, Singapore, have also been abducted since the 1970s. And you can also click on these individual victim cards to get more information on the individuals.
Yeah, now moving to North Korean victims. This victim type is also categorized into three types. Disappeared in North Korea, disappeared after repatriation, and disappeared outside North Korea. So for victims who disappeared in North Korea, as I mentioned earlier, there are a vast number of North Korean people who were taken by North Korean authorities, including Ministry of State Security agents, and whose fate and whereabouts remain unknown. On this page, you can see the top 5 reasons of disappearances. And the map shows consecutive detentions of one of the victims arrested for arranging others to escape from North Korea. North Korean authorities do not notify the family of detention and transfer, making a clear example of how North Korean authorities do not provide any information on the victim's fate or whereabouts. This is another example of enforced disappearance of North Korean from our interview. There was a case where one family member was arrested and other family members were arrested due to guilt by association and subsequently disappeared. Here, victim A was arrested for attempting to disclose military documents. After that, victim A's children and their spouses were also arrested at work, home, or at the military where they were serving due to guilt by association. Victim A and child 2 passed away while being detained at the province level MSS, but victims' family were not notified of their death. So their family could only find out through their acquaintance. So now, for now, the entire family's whereabouts remain unknown. So this is the case is documented on the database in this way. You can see why they were arrested. You can see where they were detained. And you can see the descriptions about her death at the detention center was known through someone working at the MSS, which suggests that North Korean authorities do not give the information about their fate or whereabouts.
So as we looked at internal disappearance that occurred in North Korea, we came to realize, or we noticed that a lot of North Korean escapees who are repatriated from China or Russia are also highly vulnerable to enforced disappearance upon their arrival to North Korea. So this is a map of the most common repatriation routes from China. And as you can see in these individual victim cards, this has been ongoing, like from 2005 to latest 2023. And this is another case from our in-depth interview. So victim A escaped to China and was in contact with her family every 2 to 3 days until he suddenly was unreachable. So the family tried to reach out to him or get any kind of information on his whereabouts, which they couldn't. Later, they were able to find out through an acquaintance that he was arrested on his way to Mongolia, repatriated to North Korea, and was in detention at province-level MSS at Cheongjin in North Hamgyong. So here you can see that North Korea did not notify his family of his arrest, his repatriation, or his detention. And the family had no way of really finding out about his fate or whereabouts. The last time the family heard about victim A, he was sent to a political prison camp in 2016 while he was suffering from tuberculosis.
And here's another critical issue. Enforced disappearances also occur when North Korean escapees are arrested and detained in countries like China and others. For example, when a North Korean escapee is arrested and detained in China, their families do not know their detention or their vulnerability to repatriation. So far, the cases we have shown illustrate enforced disappearances due to disclosure of internal information, guilt by association, and escaping from North Korea. But it is important to note that in addition to these reasons, North Koreans are subject to enforced disappearances for a variety of reasons. As you can see on the screen, there are so many reasons. Activities related to escaping North Korea, guilt by association, criticism against the regime, and religious activities. Detailed information and our analysis will be discussed in our upcoming findings report.
Okay, so how do we actually use this database? So if you click on this little button called the archive up at the top, it directs you to the database with all the individual cards. So if you have a specific keyword or a specific victim that you want to look up, you can use the search bar up at the left corner, or you can use different filters on the right. So for example, if we want to look up a North Korean person who has been arrested at home in the 2010s for planning to escape from North Korea, we want to click North Korean victims. And because we know they were planning to escape North Korea when they were arrested, it's an internal disappearance. And we don't know the gender, age group, or occupation, but we do know that this person was planning or preparing to escape in the 2010s. So we have 4 victims under that category, and let's look at Chang Hye-hwa, for example. So you get all this information on the victim if you click on the victim card. And here we can see that this person was detained at MSS in Hyesan for about a year before they were sent to a political prison camp in Cheongjin in early 2011. And if you click on the button on the right, you can get the relationships. So here, a related perpetrator would be an MSS agent, and a related proceeding was made under or on behalf of Chang Hye-hwa to the UN WGEID. And if you click on this card, you get more information on the proceedings.
So as we concluded, I would like to outline our key objectives going forward. First, we aim to increase global visibility and interest in the issue of enforced disappearance. Second, we wanted to collect, consolidate, preserve information about victims. Third, we intend to leverage our database to advocate for meaningful policy and legal changes. So we have several key initiatives planned. First, we are gonna release reports on enforced disappearances scheduled for July and September. This report will provide in-depth analysis and findings on enforced disappearances and the ways to hold the perpetrators accountable. Second, we will keep updating our database with cases of enforced disappearances. Third, we will keep focusing on profiling responsible commanders and their suspected connections to all these alleged human rights violations and crimes. Thank you for listening. If you have questions, please ask me.
Okay. One last thing, you can take this QR code to access our database, but not during Tony's presentation. So during lunch or at your free time. But yes, please go in and check it out because we have a lot of information and a lot of explanation. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jeon and April. For our final round of speakers in this first session, we'll explore the creation and visualization of complex chain of command linkage evidence. Let's welcome Tony Wilson, founder and director, and Nico Pera, senior technical consultant at Security Force Monitor at the Columbia Law Human Rights Institute.
Hi, everyone. Volume good? All right, great. Hi, I'm Tony Wilson. I'm the founder and director of the Security Force Monitor, which is a project of the Columbia Law School Human Rights Institute. Nico will be joining me on stage for the Q&A session, and we'll get to at the end of the presentation, the technical details, which you 100% should ask him questions about and not me. So what I'll be talking about today is first talking about ourselves, giving you a little introduction, and then talking about our work mapping the security forces, specifically the Myanmar Army, obviously of Myanmar, but with a view on how that work and that methodology and visualizations could be used and work in North Korea as well. Oh, great. Good? All right, perfect. So briefly about ourselves. Security Force Monitor, our role is to conduct open source research, primarily newspapers, but also books, state media, other text-based sources largely, to understand the chain of command, commanders, and area of operation of state security forces, be that military, police, or other security forces under the state. We use that information to see the structures through time and see how those structures and those commanders may or may not be linked to violations documented by human rights groups. And ideally, using that connections and those analysis to support those groups' efforts in achieving accountability or in memorialization, also for bringing legal cases, as well as journalists or others concerned with the conduct of state security forces. What we often try to do is kind of answer this question, which is the title of our report of who's in charge, under whose command, who is responsible for the areas at the time when these violations were documented or who were responsible for these units. Now, our role is not to make allegations, but to, again, bring evidence and bring insight into the very important, very critical documentation work that other groups do. And so for Myanmar, what our approach was to understand the chain of command from March 2011, when Min Aung Hlaing became commander-in-chief of the Myanmar military, to 12 years, the 12-year anniversary in March 2023, and to bring that data together to understand the connections between the violations documented by others and this chain of command information. So our first visualization and our first sort of set of analysis and findings was that over 60% of all senior Myanmar Army commanders who served during that 12-year period had reported cases of killings, torture, rape, and disappearances allegedly committed by units under their command. Now what that means, as you see in this visual, is we actually documented and tried to find every single senior Army commander during that period, which means we also have Army commanders which are not colored red, meaning there's no sort of, during their time in command that we have information on, there is no documented violation allegedly committed by units under their command. Now, at first blush, this might seem like wasted effort, but actually, in terms of building command responsibility for building that sort of analysis of who was in charge of what units, it provides really useful context for the potential culpability of commanders for where there are documented violations, as well as helps us ground and understand the just general structure of the military at the time. So all of this research, whether it's connected or not, provides valuable insights into this work. Now, this is our first visualization, which is also important because it's the most straightforward. There's nothing that you need to know, you, the audience, or you, the advocacy target, on the structure of the military at this point. All we're saying is these people were senior Army commanders, and there's violations. As we go on, and then I'm walking you through the structure of our report, we'll get further and further into details of the actual chain of command. This is intentional because if we're thinking about use cases for these sorts of visualizations, be they for Myanmar or for North Korea or other contexts, you will be dealing with systems, dealing with courts, dealing with other audiences that aren't necessarily going to be experts in the structures of these systems, and for which different sorts of views, different sorts of analysis of those structures will prove meaningful. So this is a first analysis of, did these commanders have violations allegedly committed by units under their command at any point during their career as a senior Army officer? Next, we take a different approach. So looking at the same commanders, we now introduce the actual chain of command of the Myanmar Army during that time period. So you can see from here, we lay out this structure, and our analysis is grounded on how many people served in these roles during that period. So for instance, I'm going to try the laser pointer and see if it works. Perfect. There's 4 people that served as Joint Chief of Staff of the military, and all 4 of them had at least one violation allegedly committed by units under their command. Similar, the Chief of Staff, the head of the 4th Bureau of Special Operations, but then you also have other ones where there's no, or there's some of them. And now this is important because this is another context, another important context for showing were these violations, potentially building the argument, were these violations widespread and systematic? And this is exposing the system of command, the system that the Army operates. And we can see the violations are really concentrated in our analysis in specific areas of Myanmar. And that is important because, again, this isn't wasted effort of documenting all over the country. It shows that the Army, in certain cases, is much more likely to be accused of committing violations than it is in other contexts, specifically here at the capital, versus ethnic areas where there's long been concerns of violations committed by the Army. This allows us to show our second finding, which is in many areas of the country, most or all of the senior Army commanders served in that position had violations allegedly committed by units under the command during that time period. Again, this is more specific, but still slightly simplified in these are each of those individual commanders from before can show up multiple times as they move around the hierarchy, as they move up the hierarchy, or out of the hierarchy as they retire. Going down even more specifically, our report shows now a more detailed chain of command where you can see the actual individual Army officers to see how many alleged violations occurred during their period of command in the specific posts that they held. You can also see if there are images of them or potential images of them or no images of them through this chain of command that is interactive, but just kind of scrolling for your purposes here. An important note for Myanmar, but for any context, is as we're documenting, as we're building this chain of command through our research, we never assume any officer named is the same person if they show up in different positions. And this is important because the number 2 of the Army, So Win, there is another So Win who's a completely different person, more historical than them. Similarly, there's major commanders who, other people with the exact same names who were protesters or senior opposition figures. We never assume, us for Security Force Monitor, never assume anyone serving in different positions with the same name and rank is the same person unless sources explicitly tell us they are. And finally, building our data on the chain of command, building our data on commanders, tracking all of that information through time allows us to build for individual allegations the entire chain of command, starting at the top, going down. Importantly, in Myanmar and in other contexts, you can see a single unit could have multiple chains of command simultaneously. So in this case, the unit, the division that's accused of committing the violation actually gets to the same top level commanders through two different simultaneous overlapping chains of command at the same time. And this is important to demonstrate, and is also took, I think, a couple of days of Nico's time to actually build that chain of command programmatically, that the chain of command can differ through time and change through time. So in this case, this unit specifically always has two paths to the top, but that path with the commander who's highlighted in red is a regional command, so it depends, because this unit was in that time, in that period, this is its chain of command up. The other thing that's very important, thinking about accountability processes, thinking about this being useful for our partners, is we are transparent with all of our sources of how we built this chain of command at each level of the chain of command. So you can see the count of sources for each person establishing this person was in this position during these times, held these ranks, this position is at this point in the chain of command through time. This methodology has been applied to Myanmar, has been applied to 20 other countries at this point, and could easily be applied to North Korea as well as the great programming work that went into actually building this report. So if you're interested, you can check out the report, myanmar.securityforcemonitor.org, as well as the rest of our work at securityforcemonitor.org. I'm trying to keep it under time, so I'll actually wrap it up there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Tony and Nico. I'd like to request you to please come back on stage. And I'd like to call the previous speakers on stage as well, so we can kick off a short round of Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have any questions, and our staff will come over to you with a mic. For the sake of time, please only raise your hand if you have a question, not a comment. And please keep your questions short. We will be answering 3 to 4 questions. Please ask your questions first. The speakers will be writing them down and answering them together after all the questions have been asked. We will try to wrap up by 12:10. Thank you.
Hello. This is a question for Huridocs and for Footprints, and for both of you. I would like if you could tell me about how your databases work to connect the underlying source material where you learned about a particular thing to the individual disappeared person or to the event. In both cases, you showed nice structures in the various examples of the way that things relate between victims and perpetrators, for example, in the Footprints case, and in the Huridocs cases to other structures, to space and time in particular. But tell me about how you relate to the sources, to the information pieces, because often we hear about the same victim or the same event from many different sources.
Hi, my name is Robin Lee from the U.S. Embassy. Thank you for the great presentations. My question goes to Tony. One of the last presentation slide that shows the chain of command. I was wondering if you could explain a little more about the sources, the number of sources that were underneath each individuals. Do these sources refer to the open source data, which shows the link between the individuals and the human rights violations that have been committed? Thank you.
질문 한국말로 그냥 드릴게요. 이제 앞으로 어떻게 할지가 궁금한데, 왜냐하면 이제 북한 강제 실종 같은 경우에는 탈북자분들의 인터뷰라든지 이제 그런 정보가 되게 중요한데 점점 입국하는 탈북자 수도 줄고 한국에 그럼 앞으로 어떻게 데이터를 수집할 수 있는지 그런 어려움은 어떻게 극복하려고 하시는지 궁금합니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 통일만민협회 대표 김성아입니다. 그 휴리독스 측에 한 가지 질문을 한다면 저희도 데이터 보여준 거 전에 한번 화상회의를 잠깐 보여드렸다시피 이 부분에 대한 보안 문제에 대해서 가장 중요한 부분인데 보안 문제를 이제 데이터를 갖고 있는 NGO와 그걸 관리하는 휴리독스의 이러한 문제에 대해서 지금 이 자리에서 공개는 어렵겠지만 공개 가능한 선에서 어느 정도 우리가 파악을 해야 되는지 그게 가장 첫 번째 질문이고요. 두 번째 질문은 아까 그 번역을 100명의 그 번역을 3개월 동안 했다는 게 되게 흥미롭게 받아들였어요. 근데 탈북민들 특히 중국 내 탈북민들 같은 경우에는 중국의 지역 사투리 언어와 한국의 언어가 아닌 북한의 사투리 언어 지역별의 사투리 언어를 씁니다. 이거에 대한 번역은 정말로 가장 어려운 난문제인데 이러한 문제에 대해서 그 시스템에 올릴 때 자동 번역의 그 의미가 영어만 되는지 거기에 한계된 언어들이 과연 어느 선이 정말 가능한 그 너무나도 방대하잖아요. 그 가능한 선이 어디까지인지 그걸 좀 질문하고 싶고요. 다음은 그 아까 지휘명령 체계 발표하신 분들께 좀 질문을 하고 싶은데 군의 명령 체계를 찾는다는 문제는 생각보다 어려운 위험한 난이도 위험을 감수하는 부분입니다. 특히 우리가 지금 하려고 하는 북한 인권 문제에서 중국의 꽁하는 명령지휘 체계 가장 강제복송을 많이 하는 지역을 도출해야 되는 건 여기에 앉은 모든 북한 인권 단체들의 NGO들의 과제입니다. 이 문제와 북중 국경에서의 가장 고문이 악화되고 있는 그러한 지역의 보위부의 명령 체계를 우리가 찾아야 되는데 그러한 위험도에서 지금 명령 체계 이거를 도출을 할 때 위험도가 혹시 있었는지 그런 사례들을 좀 말씀해 주시면 좋겠습니다.
I think we can take one more question.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 질문이 있는데요. 많은 인터뷰들을 태민 분들에게 하실 텐데 그런 인터뷰를 하신 과정에서 이제 나온 사례들이 공개가 되는 부분이 있어서 물론 이름이나 이런 부분들은 다 비공개로 하겠지만은 그런 사례들로 인해서 유출할 수 있는 그런 부분들에 대해서의 보완은 어떻게 되는지 사례들은 증인이기 때문에 이제 증인에 대한 그런 진술에 대해서는 사실상 왜곡하거나 이렇게 하면 안 되는 부분이 있잖아요. 근데 그 부분에 대해서 추측을 할 수가 있잖아요. 어떤 사람이 이렇게 사례를 발표했다라고 추측할 수 있는 부분에 대해서는 어떻게 보완 처리가 되는지가 궁금합니다.
Thank you for your questions. We'll move to the speakers to answer them.
I can go first to answer Patrick's question. Thank you for your question. And regarding the approach to relate source materials with the victim records, we only open the templates of victims and perpetrators in the current Footprint 2.0 website, but we also have another template only for testimonies. And in that part, we can relate the victim record directly to the testimonies, related testimonies, if that was disclosable information. And within the database, users can directly relate and see the relationship between victim records and also testimonies as well. And within the victim template, we also collect 20 to 30 different properties, meaning including the information about their disappearances, but also detailed case information about that specific record. So within the victim information, there would be accessible information about the victim's sources of information about this victim record. And if that is specifically related to specific testimonies that TJWG collected and open to share to public, it is also accessible within the database. And I will come back to another question that was directed to Huridocs related to security and translations, if Footprints wants to add more about that question.
네, 저 소스끼리 어떻게 연결하는지에 대해서는 사실 빅점 타입마다 굉장히 다른 특성을 가지고 있어서 네, 그래서 따로 설명을 드려야 될 것 같아요. 저희 예를 들면 전시 납북자 같은 경우에는 정부에서 실제로 한국 전쟁이 끝난 이후에 몇 명이 납치되었는지 이런 것들을 조사하기 위해서 여러 차례 정부에서 조사를 했습니다. 그래서 전시 납북자 단체에서 이런 자료들, 예를 들면 뭐 실향 3인 이런 오피셜 문서가 여러 개 존재를 하고 그것들을 통해서 모은 자료와 그리고 그 단체에 소속되어 있는 여러 피해자분들의 증언이 또 따로 존재하고요. 그 단체에서 낸 아주 상세한 자료들도 존재를 해요. 그래서 전시납북자 같은 경우에는 그런 자료들을 통해서 모은 리스트, 명단을 저희가 받아서 결국 누가 perpetrator고 어디서 사라졌고 이런 것들을 저희가 연결을 했고요. 또 전후 납북자 같은 경우에는 또 피해자 단체로부터 UN 워킹 그룹 실무 그룹에 낸 진정서와 리스트 명단을 받았고요. 그래서 저희가 그거를 대조를 하면서 그 문서들을 통해서 누가 빅tim이고 누가 잡혀갔고 어떤 프로시딩과 관련이 있는지 저희가 그렇게 연결을 했고요. 사실 저희가 말씀드린 것처럼 또 심층 인터뷰를 통한 거는 북한 내부에 관한 거기 때문에 조금 더 어려운 면이 있습니다. 왜냐하면 전적으로 사라진 가족들에 대해서 이야기하는 거를 증언을 바탕으로 해야 하는데 북한은 누가 잡아갔는지 밝히지 않고 보위부에서 잡혀갔어요. 근데 어떻게 아시나요? 라고 물어보면 당연히 보위부고 근데 그거는 사실이거든요. 밤에 갑자기 와서 잡아가면 보위부가 잡아간 거고 그래서 보위부가 2명이 와서 잡아갔어요 라고 하면 저희는 보위부 2명이라고 하고 왜 어떻게 보위부라고 생각하시는지 저희가 그런 질문을 아주 상세하게 해서 저희 인터뷰는 약 2시간 가량 정도 되고요. 그래서 그렇게 얻은 소스들을 연결을 했고 사실 북한의 보위부 같은 경우에는 오랜 기간 북한 인권에 관한 조사가 되어 왔음에도 불구하고 그 커맨 스트럭처 이런 거에 대해서 밝혀진 바가 많이 없습니다. 그래서 저희가 앞으로 기관에서 뭐 일하셨던 분들이나 여러 가지 소스들을 통해서 저희가 조사를 하려고 하고 있고 또 앞으로 계속 해서 커맨드에 대한 조사 내용도 발표를 할 예정입니다.
I think my answers are going to address 3 different parts of multiple questions. So one, regarding the translations, I think it's a great point that there's North Korean dialects and this may require some background knowledge on North Korean context. And those are most frequently shown in our testimonies. And the researchers actually go through the testimonies and do the translations ourselves. Another point brought up was how we are going to continue to investigate these cases with a decreased number of North Korean escapees. So our primary method of contacting escapees is through snowballing method. So we build a relationship with our interviewee and they introduce us to their acquaintances or colleagues or people they know in Korea. And we can also get more new cases of enforced disappearance from other sources like proceedings. And I think the last part was about security. So we have gone through the process of redacting information that can be used to pinpoint specific individuals. And all that information is actually kept in our internal database in an air-gapped computer that is managed under a strict security protocols. And our, of course, number 1 step is to get consent from our interviewee if it's okay to use this information or store this information. And if they do not feel comfortable, they can tell us anytime and we will take appropriate measures to the level they feel comfortable.
네, 탈북하시는 분들이 많이 없는데 어떻게 정보를 계속 얻을 수 있는지에 대해서 말씀을 드리면 사실 강제 실종 같은 경우에는 특히 가족들을 통해서 저희가 정보를 얻기 때문에 아주 최근까지의 소식을 얻을 수가 있고요. 왜냐하면 한국에 있는 가족들이
다른 방법을 통해서 연락을 취합니다. 그래서 비교적 최근까지 연락을 취할 수 있었고 저희가 또 최근의 정보를 알기 위해서 가장 최근에 탈북하신 분들을 인터뷰하기도 했고요. 그리고 이거를 크로스 체크하는 방법으로는 북한 내부에서 정보를 얻을 수 있는 분들이 계시거든요. 그래서 저희가 그분들을 통해서 크로스 체크도 하고 있고 앞으로도 그렇게 할 예정입니다.
One last comment about the security. As a perspective from Huridocs, when we host a database, we assign a hosting agreement, which includes non-disclosure agreement, which means that if you choose to have your database as a private one, North Korean Footprints website is a public one, so we were able to showcase and present the database to everyone. But if you choose to have your database as a private database, we also have this non-disclosure agreement within Huridocs that only the related project team members are accessing the database, and those database, we are hosting the database, but your data will be saved in an encrypted version, and only the project team members, even in the Huridocs, will access the database upon your request. So that is one security-related questions that I wanted to clarify. And out of around 300 databases, most of them are private databases, so we do take care about security concerns really seriously.
Thank you. So for the questions, I'll try to answer both as far as the sources behind the chain of command and defining the chain of command for police or other kind of non-military officials. So for generally how we build the chain of command across all of our countries is we deal with basically 3 sets of sources. So the first set of sources are ones that are very broad and general, but give us a basic understanding of how the security forces work. So for Myanmar, one of the sources we really turned to were scholarly books that laid out generally this is how the military is structured. It doesn't give us any specific information about this unit's under this, but it gives us a broad framework to go to sort of start our research from. Next, there's kind of a contingency of sources or a group of sources that gives us maybe more specific information on regions of the country or specific military units or things like that, that then we build into the context of those kind of broader sources. And then finally, we have a range of sources, generally media sources, be they independent opposition media, what have you, or state media that would give us just information about a single commander or a single unit with no reference to that broader structure, but because we have those other sets of sources, they kind of build it together into a complete picture. As part of that, one of the things that's very useful from our approach and why we take the approach of building that picture of all of those senior army commanders of Myanmar, let's say, even though some of them aren't connected to any violations based on our analysis, is everything we learn about a brigadier general helps us when we encounter a different brigadier general. So we can compare them across to say, like, well, does the claims about this from this one source about this specific person at this specific point in time being in this posting, does that make sense? One of the very common things we come across is sources that say, Brigadier General so-and-so who's in charge of this battalion. And what that often means is, well, he is in charge of the battalion. He's not the battalion commander. He's like 2-3 levels above it. But like eventually in the chain of command, you get him. And it's a very kind of offhand reference that someone might give. But because we know all this information, we can say like, well, battalion commanders are generally colonels, or something doesn't quite add up here. Similarly, sources often will get like the geography of the country wrong, and it's not them trying to be nefarious. There's global New Light of Myanmar sources that invent townships that don't exist. The other thing that building this picture allows us to do is to know with very limited information how things connect to the chain of command. So the fact that in the Myanmar example, something happened in a particular township, well, we know sources through time established this township is under this unit, this township's part of this district, that's part of this water force. And to kind of move to the second question,
Often that's what we find with police or non-military forces, is they're really organized around the concept of these administrative geographical units of how the country is organized. So you have villages and towns that are part of districts. So there's a district level police command, and those various district level police commands are part of the province, and the province is part of regions, and they report up to the minister of police or what have you. Generally, those forces also have the geographic component, and then some sort of specialized, centrally commanded unit that can be deployed to various situations as need be. The police are generally security forces. We've documented in many countries, probably most extensively the Philippines, actually, which is publicly available on our database as well. So it is an area of expertise we definitely have, and can kind of approach both different types of security forces that share a lot of similarities across countries. So we've done research in 20 plus countries now, and there's a lot of lessons learned or best practices or challenges that we know we're going to face because we face them in other contexts as well. How sources report about security forces, like that Brigadier General so-and-so is in charge of that battalion. That's just a common practice that we see. So, Nico.
Yeah, hello. I'd like to start. Our database is built off of things that we find in the public and in the public record, whether it's books or articles or this, and we see ourselves as being able to aggregate that information together into something that can be useful in these other contexts. So we keep the chain of every assertion that is made in our database. We can track to where that came from, or if we've made an inference or an aggregation combining multiple claims from different sources together to make new information, we're able to split them back apart again. So we don't collect witness testimonies ourselves, and we rely on the information from our partners to do that.
And just briefly on that point, we really cherish and guard our role of, we deal with public information, and so we're always pushing our information to our partners to say, if you have private information you want to build on top of this, great, please do. We are not journalists. Do not give us leaked information. We are not, trained or capable of dealing with confidential interview information, nor do we need to be. These are things that we can kind of hand off to our partners and help them think about how to organize information that they might get from those sources into our model. But everything we use is publicly available, and also because we're all scrappy nonprofits built on free tools or very cheap things, so that it's also things that our partners can incorporate into their own working models as well.
Any other? We have about 2 minutes to add. Any other ment or? Okay. All right.
Maybe just to clarify on the translation, because I don't think we have fully answered your questions around how to translate the North Korean dialects, hundreds and hundreds of documents that is in North Korean dialects. The reason why we were able to translate nearly 100,000 of records within a few months was the victim records were mainly names, addresses, and fixed information. So for example, in Korean name, usually Korean name consists of 3 syllables. So it's easy to assign each Korean letters to corresponding alphabet in English, and it can automate the translation process easily. But if you're talking about translating the testimonies that is in North Korean dialects, obviously that would need a lot of work and a different approach. But because of how the footprints data collection was structured, mainly was names and addresses that can be easily automatically translated, that was the process. But yeah, you definitely have to have another approach to translate the entire testimonies, obviously, yes.
Okay, thank you so much to our to our speakers. Can we please give them a round of applause?